Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Blue Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And I'm here with our guest, as always, to talk about well-being and the science behind it. Today, I have a very interesting topic that we have addressed before, but today we're going to look at it from a different angle. Today, we're going to talk about the role of sexual empowerment in mental health and overall well-being, which I think not a lot of us are open to talk about. And, you know, it's about time we talk about it more. And my guest today is, I think, in New Zealand at the moment, but she has a very interesting story. I'm sure she will tell us all about it. But by way of introduction, I have in the virtual studio with me today, Jessica Maxwell, Ph.D. She is an assistant professor in the social psychology program in the Department of Health, Aging and Society at McMaster University. So Jess, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm so excited to talk about the topic. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. And yes, this is a topic I'm really passionate about. So I'm grateful to share some of my wisdom.
Yeah. And thanks so much for joining us, even though you have a little bit of a cold. So, in case our audience wonders, if Jess needs to take a break or if she sounds like she's a bit sad, no, she's not. Her voice just needs a little bit of TLC. So yeah, we'll definitely get there. But I think what is interesting to me is when I was researching your work, right? I told you about this. I was like, oh, wow, like you studied at UT and, like it seems like you were studying in Canada. I don't know if you were from there. And then you landed here and then you have all these like different research and, articles. So tell us a bit more about yourself, your professional journey. How did you land here and why are you so interested in talking about today's topic?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, when I was in undergrad, so I am Canadian. So when I was in undergrad studies at Queen's University, I was taking a social psychology class in second year, and I really loved that. And then when I went to third year, I took a class on human sexuality, which I feel like just like blew my mind. So I grew up in a pretty like religious environment. I didn't really have like comprehensive sex ed. And so, I feel like in college or university, depending where your listeners are from, just kind of, I feel like just that college experience and watching Sex in the City and, taking a human sexuality class really got me interested in the topic. And then when I found out that it was something that you could actually study using the scientific method, I was like, oh my goodness, like I feel like this is my calling. And so I consider myself a mix between a relationship researcher and a sexuality researcher because my focus is really on how couples can have better sex lives and better relationships. So I like to tell people and kind of just get it straight right off the bat that unfortunately I am not a couples therapist. So I never really wanted to work one-on-one with people. I'm kind of more of a data nerd, so I love stats. So what I tend to do is look at sort of on the aggregate, like groups of couples. So on average, what sorts of beliefs will make people have better sex lives, for instance. So I never was really interested in my professional journey of doing the therapy thing. I really, really liked the research aspect. And so I've been fortunate enough to continue researching relationships and sexuality when I did my PhD at the University of Toronto. And then I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Florida State University. So that was a big switch from Toronto to Tallahassee. I met my husband when I was on my postdoc, so that was good from a personal perspective. And then I got my first academic job at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. So close to close to Australia where you are. And I absolutely loved New Zealand. But after 3 years, I felt I just just really, really missed home. It was a pandemic. We couldn't leave New Zealand. And as amazing as New Zealand was, it just wasn't home for me. So I felt fortunate that I just recently started at McMaster University, that is here in Canada. And I get to,
Oh,
yeah, so I'm back in Canada now.
you're back. Okay.
Yes, yes, which is great. But I really did love New Zealand. And I feel so lucky to do the job that I do. So I just finished this semester teaching undergrads a class on the psychology of close relationships, and then another class on sex and well-being, which is obviously perfect given the content of today's podcast. So I promise I won't squeeze a whole semester worth of content into this podcast, but I feel like I could.
Oh, yes, please. I would love that. I would love to see one of your classes. It sounds so interesting. I think, this is a topic that, as I mentioned, my friends and I talk about quite a bit. And I think we all have different perspectives, but I think the underlying issue that we probably don't really realize is how we view it. Because it's so different for each of us. And like you said earlier, you were brought up in a certain environment where you didn't really get any sex
Mhm,
ed and you didn't really know much about it. So that got you interested. And
mhm.
as I told you where I'm from Vietnam, and we really honestly did not
Yes.
have much sex ed either. It's a new thing for me. So when I moved to Australia, I was like, wow, it's so interesting. So we have a lot of different perspectives because obviously you've been around, I've been around. So we'll have fun with it. And hopefully we bring a lot of perspectives to our audience today. But before we do that, we have a section where we called Have You Met Jess? We want to get
Oh,
some of your
okay.
recommendations. I love this part because I get great
Oh,
recommendations from my guest and
okay.
I just have fun with it. And sometimes I take it on. Sometimes it's just an opportunity for the guests to share more about themselves and what they like, what they enjoy. And I think that's a really good way for our audience to get to know the guest better. So, Jess, are you
Yes.
ready?
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll do my best. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. Don't think too much. Just the first thing that pop into your head when you hear it. What is a
Okay.
book you would recommend?
I like Lord of the Flies.
Okay, cool. What about a movie?
Dirty Dancing. It's a
I
classic.
love
It's
it.
great.
Yeah, love it. I actually just watched it like last year or something, but it's really
Oh,
good.
really? Yeah, and
Yeah.
it holds up like decently well considering when it was made.
Yeah, because I watch a lot of things and then they just make Dirty Dancing reference, and I was like,
Yes, you need to
now
watch
I
the
really need to
original.
watch it. Yeah, like what is it about? Like I don't understand. I need to watch it to understand the reference. I did, so now I do.
No, you do. Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Okay.
you liked it. Hopefully you liked it and you don't, just end the podcast right
Yeah.
now.
Okay. Next one. It's a must ask because obviously you're our guest. But what is a podcast that you would recommend?
I am such a podcast junkie. I love so many podcasts, but one I've recently enjoyed is Bear Brook. So if you're into
Okay.
true crime, it's good. There's 2 seasons now that have separate stories. So
Oh,
true
wow.
crime, I won't spoil it, but like the first one actually was kind of like important in terms of real life outcomes. If that makes sense. So
Mm,
Bear Brook, like bear,
mm.
like rar, and then Brook.
Okay. Yeah. I think I was kind of laughing and smiling in the background because our team here at LMSL, I think like half of the team love true crime podcasts and true crime documentaries and anything true
Oh
crime. So
yes.
I'm sure they'll
Okay.
love this
Okay.
recommendation.
Those are
Yeah.
my people.
Yeah, definitely your people. Um, how about your famous role model? Or if not a famous person, then who's your personal role model?
Oh, okay, that's good. I was thinking famous role models. One of them, not related to my career, is just Betty White, because I think she was such an amazing and inspiring woman. Of course, there's other people like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, all of those kind of classic people. But I feel like also just more, more close to home. Like I feel like my great grandma and my grandma, just I come from a long line of like strong willed, independent women. And I always really look up to that. And I think of, and this will probably come through in the podcast a lot, but like, how much women are at a disadvantage sometimes. And so I think it's especially cool when it's like, even when it was that much harder, thinking of women who were able to kind of carve their own career path or, manage a lot of children and all of that. So I feel like women are amazing. And, whether we're talking about famous people or just kind of closer to home, fortunate to have lots of good role models in my life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And final question in this part is what is a course you've completed that you would like to talk about?
Ooh, in terms of, yeah, so I wasn't sure about that one. I kind of was thinking A course I completed. I think that I would talk about the courses I teach. I don't know if that counts, but
Yeah,
um,
sure.
so the course I just completed teaching was sex and well-being. But why I was excited about that and why I would recommend taking a class like that is because, well, research does show that if you take a sexuality class, it helps you be more open-minded. So I think that's important from students. And I really enjoyed teaching that course because I got to bring in lots of fun things. So I love the media and, watching, like we were talking about, movies, TV shows, podcasts. So I end up doing that a lot in my classes and kind of finding any podcast I can tangentially related to the topic. Like my students will listen to it. So we listen to like a podcast on the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. There's books on the five love languages. Like I like to debunk a lot of media things.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Well, you're gonna have to debunk a bunch of things later then, because now that you've
Yes,
mentioned
yes.
it, I'm keen to know more. So, without further ado, let's get into today's topic. And because the show is about well-being, let's start by
Mm,
getting your definition on well-being, because all of the guests here have very different definitions. There might be a lot of overlaps, but I find that each person's definition is super unique. So, what is your personal
yes.
definition of well-being?
Oh, and I love that you said personal definition, not like the ones in the literature, right? Because the literature also, again, kind of doesn't agree on what exactly well-being is, but
Yeah,
um,
that's what
not
I've heard.
surprising. Yeah. To me, well-being is just sort of being at ease or at peace physically, mentally, and emotionally, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. It's like there's that balance that's so important, right? Because I think a lot of the guests also mentioned, like, sometimes you think it's one thing, but no, it's like you're missing the whole picture because there are so many different things
Yes,
in our lives. Yeah, totally agree.
exactly. Yeah, I think it's like you can't, there's so many different aspects of it, right? It can't just be
Yeah,
one thing. Yeah, it's hard to
yeah,
define, right? I think it's kind of elusive in that
yeah.
we're all searching for well-being.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like I don't know if anyone would agree, but I think it's like a constant struggle, because
Yes,
at a
yes,
certain point you might find yourself like, oh, like I feel great physically,
right.
mentally, but not there yet emotionally.
Hmm,
Or it
hmm.
could be like, oh yeah, like I feel great emotionally, I feel great mentally, but my physical health is kind of in decline a little bit and I need to work on that. And I feel like it's like this constant battle of
Yeah,
finding what is missing and like what's wrong, and keep working on that, because it's not like it's always going to be perfect. And
no,
sometimes
exactly.
even all of them might be in decline, not just one.
It's true. It's true. It's like, yeah, you can be really excelling in one domain, but not the others. But as I'm sure will come out through our chat too, it's like everything is so interconnected, even if we're talking about like your happiness and then your relationship quality and your sexual quality, it's all feeding into each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we just sort of touched on one of the misconceptions about well-being, right? Like you
Yes.
cannot, you don't always have it all. You can have it all, but you
Yes.
don't always have it all, and that's okay. It's just a constant, journey of finding out what works for you. So in your line of work, I'm pretty sure, especially in the area of like social psychology, you definitely come across a bunch of misconceptions when it comes to well-being. So I wonder
Yes.
what
Yes.
what are some of the biggest ones that you've noticed?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, first of all, well, oh wow, there's so many, but a couple that come to mind are just
Yeah.
sometimes what we think will make us happy doesn't, right? Or things that we think will make us happy, like, or would make us happy forever, might just last a short time. So, things like winning the lottery, it's not going to make you as happy as you think it will. Or, getting married. Yes, it's going to make you happy, but it might not last as long as you think that happiness. So I think that's one misconception. But more broadly, I think another misconception is that well being is like the absence of disease or dysfunction. So this comes up a lot when we speak specifically about the sexual domain. I think people think like sexual health and sexual well being, they think like not having an STI or, not having erectile dysfunction. And they don't really think of sort of the positive side, right? It's like having well being to me is the presence of positives and not just the absence of negatives.
Yeah.
So I think that can sometimes be a misconception there. Um, and I think the last thing I'll add there is I think we often think that, you know, well-being is the same as being like happy all the time, and it really isn't. So to me, at least in my definition and some other people's theories, right, like well-being, that's why I said it's being at ease or at peace. Like it's being comfortable with a whole range of emotions, right? And being authentic and things like that. So it's not necessarily that, you're just like skipping along every day, loving life. I think we can have high levels of well-being if we're feeling fulfilled and we're feeling like we're being our true self, even if we have some negative emotions sometimes.
Oh yeah, that is so true. I really love that. Like, I think that is something that's been on my mind a lot lately.
Mhm.
I think it doesn't, it's not necessarily related to today's topic per se, but I felt like there's been some sort of like imbalance, and I was kind of thinking why, like I didn't really know
Mhm.
why, and for a really long time, like I think the past couple of months, I was just kind of like floating through, and I was like, something is off, but I don't really know what
Mhm.
it is, you know. And I was kind of like thinking about, like one of the misconceptions that you mentioned. And I was like, why am I not feeling like great?
Yes,
Like,
yeah.
and I'm annoyed because I'm not feeling great. And then I was like, but you know what? It's okay. Like it's okay to feel funky
Yeah,
sometimes because
exactly.
I still take care of my physical health, and I've talked to my colleagues and my guests pretty much like every week on this show that I've been working out daily, and that's been so helpful for both my physical
Yeah.
health and mental health. Emotionally, I don't know because like it's kind of like it fluctuates, and things happen. I just don't really like, I cannot really put my fingers around it. And then yesterday I just sat down and I read this really beautiful poetry book. I'm pretty sure everyone
Oh,
knows about Rupi Kaur and
yes.
her latest collection of poems called Homebody. And I was like, I realized, oh, you know what? This is good because, like I've been feeling like there's sort of a disconnect, even though, as I said, I've been working on my
Mm.
physical health, but like I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect. So, long story short, after I read the book, I realized I have productivity anxiety.
Okay, gotcha. So you
Yeah,
just are
yeah.
constantly worried about feeling like you need to be productive and
Yeah. And then I
yeah.
was like, that's why I wasn't feeling happy. That's why my
Mm.
emotions kind of like was kind of like fluctuating. I was like, something is off about me within myself. I couldn't really put my fingers around it.
Ah,
And then I realized that last year I worked really hard on a lot of things and I didn't
yes.
take a break. I was really burnt out. I know that I was burnt out. And I took a long vacation. I mean, actually, not one long vacation, but like a couple of different ones. But for some different factors, I never actually recovered from burnout.
Yes, and that's so important. And I was going to say, like, even when we get into talking about specifically like sex, like burnout and stress can have repercussions
Yeah.
there, right? It's like not only
Yeah.
will they affect your work life, your friendships, like every aspect of your life, but even the bedroom too. And I think it's really good that you
Yeah.
recognize that you were feeling some burnout.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, yeah, when I couple the two together, I just really want to talk about it on this show because this show is about well-being, right? And I think our audience would, some of us, some of the audience would relate with this because sometimes you're like, oh, like I need to do more in life.
Yes, yes.
Like I need to progress more. Like, why am I not doing more? And yesterday I sat myself down and I was like, Lou, listen, it's okay to just enjoy life.
Yes, yes, like have some self-compassion and try
Yeah.
not to I
Yeah.
mean, I was gonna say to put like a social psych term on it, we would call that in a way maybe trying to like maximize, right? Like in terms of like you're always trying to like be the best, do the best, and that can just take a toll for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And about today's topic, now I'm going to be very
Yeah.
honest. I'm single, and I just don't really have a sex life right now. But I'm sure our audience, like our audience would be in different like scenarios in their lives, and we can sort of all relate. So just to kind of have
Yes,
context, let's try to make this conversation as inclusive as we can, because
of
I think even
course.
single people can relate to this, right?
1,000%. Like, and I've even done some research on like casual sex.
Yeah,
And in my own research, I found for single people, their sex life is tied to their well being to the same extent as people in relationships, right? So
yeah,
even if single people aren't always having sex, some of them definitely are. That looks different. We can get into it if we
yeah,
want, friends with
yeah. We'll
benefits,
definitely get into that.
the whole gamut.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think I love that idea, right? Because that's the
yeah,
thing. It's like, yeah, it can
yeah,
sex can happen in a lot of
yeah.
different types of relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I never really, as I said, I don't really talk about this topic very often. It is actually quite hard for me to talk about it today. I think to a certain extent because I didn't
Yeah.
really have any education. I mean, obviously, like, as a grown up, I've watched a lot of like TV series, movies, talked to friends
Yes.
about it, read articles and read books about it. But I think it's still a new area. And again,
Mhm.
it can be relatable to everyone because everyone has a sex life. Like, no sex life is a sex
Yes.
life, I would
Well,
say, right?
exactly. Yeah. Oh, for
Yeah,
sure. Like asexuality is kind of, yeah, recognizing that you do, it's like something, yeah, I completely agree.
yeah,
Um, and I think what's interesting too is, as much as I feel like we think like, oh, it's 2023 and, it seems like media is really liberal and, everyone's out having sex. Like there's a lot. I'm always shocked when I'm teaching
yeah.
current like 22-year-olds at what they don't know.
Mm.
We could go on a whole thing. I feel like comprehensive sex ed and the lack of sexual education in a lot of
Yeah,
places is a huge problem. But you're in good company, right? Because I feel like so many people have not had proper sex ed or still feel taboo talking about sex.
oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, or if they had sex ed, it was very like fear based or prevention
Yeah,
based and sort of more health based, but not in terms of like how to have a healthy sexual relationship. So I think it's really
yeah.
normal that it's something people still struggle with, and
Hmm.
something I think still people find taboo to speak about, even younger generations.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. Trust me. Definitely. I know that because I have my group of friends range from like really young, like 18, 19-year olds to like much older than me, 30, 40. And I think like it's a very interesting area to navigate. As I said, it's a spectrum of everything and everyone can relate to this to a certain extent. But I think the one thing that would ground us before we go into the different aspects of it and the misconceptions or, like the myths that you are going to debunk, what does sexual empowerment mean? And again, I would very much love for you to help us understand it from an inclusive perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting when I saw the phrasing kind of sexual empowerment because I feel like it could mean different things to different people, and it's not necessarily like the verbiage that we would use in the field in terms of what I think you're getting at. So I'll go with what I think you're getting at. You can let me know if that's sort of the vibe you're thinking. But when I hear the word sexual empowerment, I think of someone being comfortable and confident with their sexuality. And I also think about that including sort of being feeling comfortable asserting yourself in the bedroom. So being comfortable telling your partner what you like versus what you don't like, and just feeling like you can be yourself in your sex life. Does that
Yeah.
ring true to what you were kind of imagining with sexual empowerment?
Yeah, that was what I was kind of thinking as well, and then you put it
Yeah.
into words perfectly. I mean,
Okay,
again,
awesome.
I'm not the expert here. You are. And I think I think
Yes, yeah.
it's good to hear from your perspective because you've done a lot of work, looking at different people, right? So that's the start to the conversation. But then you mentioned something earlier because when I was sharing my story earlier, you were kind of saying like burnout can have an impact on everything, including the bedroom, and
Of
like
course.
at the same time, you just gave us the definition of sexual empowerment, feeling comfortable in your own skin, being able to assert needs and talk
Hmm.
about different things.
Hmm.
And again, it's all related to well-being, right? So if we put
Exactly.
all of that together, how would you say,
Mm.
how would you say sexual empowerment can affect our well-being overall? Because there's so many ways this can go, right? It can be like
Exactly.
sexual empowerment level really good, or it could be really bad, and in
Yes. Yes.
turn that will affect our well-being. So how does that work?
And I was just about to say, like, I think that's the thing that's good and bad, right? Is that I always say, like, there is so much evidence that sex is tied to our happiness and our well being. And that can be a great thing because it means that having great sex or enjoying your sex life can, lead to increases in life satisfaction and happiness. But we could think of it in a more negative way as well, meaning if you're not satisfied with your sex life, that could detract from your overall sense of well being. So, just to give you kind of a flavor, one of an early study that I think is interesting. What they did was they polled women multiple times a day, like they'd get an alert and they were asked, what are you up to? And how happy are you? And a bunch of different emotions. And they found that of all the activities people were doing during the day, sex was the activity that led to the most considerable amount of happiness. So even more than things like socializing with friends or eating dinner, it was like sex had this special feature in terms of being the most positive experience. And then I feel like when we get into the thinking about stress and well-being, it can sometimes be bidirectional, right? And I feel like that resonates with a lot of us, right? It's like if you're super stressed, for most people, that reduces their desire and they don't really want to have sex if if they're like super stressed with a work deadline. I mean, some people do have sex to reduce stress, but for the most part, if you're super stressed, you're not wanting to have sex. And then, if you're not having sex, that can cause you stress too, right? Because then you're not getting those boosts to your well-being that's, might come from things like hormones, or I think often just come from the relational benefits that happen with sex. So yeah, like the well-being sex link is definitely something that's there. The association, I think it sometimes can go both ways. They can influence each other. And it's something that's maybe not as explored as much as you would think it would be by now. But of course, there are a lot of like nationally representative surveys that show cross-sectionally, that link between having more sex or better sex and well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's like a new thing for me to think about, at least, because I don't know if other people think about it in that sense. For example, I have some of my friends who are really, active in their sex life, but they don't really talk about the benefit of their sex life in their well-being.
Mm,
It's just
mm.
mainly around, like, oh, like I have needs and I need them to be met, something along that line. But it's never a conversation about how much that improves their well-being, for example.
Yeah, or even like how it improves their like day-to-day mood. Or one of
Yeah.
the favorite studies I love sharing that came out a couple of years ago found that if you have sex tonight, it's going to boost your work productivity and your mood tomorrow. So I think there are all these things, but yeah, I think you're right. People don't always go to that step of saying, yes, I think this is,
Yeah.
affecting my global satisfaction with life.
Yeah.
I think people often fail to appreciate the spillover that sex has to other domains, including well-being, right? And including
Yeah.
relationship well-being. So I think it's like we like to sometimes silo sex as thinking of it something separate, or it's like a physical need, but it really is something that's emotional, and something that can link to well-being through so many different pathways, I think, that we're still sort of exploring, as a
Yeah.
field.
Yeah, absolutely. But like I know this question was not in the agenda, but I have to ask because when it comes to work, right? You don't go to work talking about this topic, right? Even though
No, no, exactly.
you just said having sex today will improve your productivity tomorrow. That's a very interesting thing, but you never talk about this. And
You're
I
right. You're right.
and I think like it's because of professionalism. Obviously, you're not going to mention these kinds of topic, and
Right,
you
right.
don't go around asking their colleague about their sex life unless you're
Yeah.
really close and you actually talk about that. But I want to ask in terms of like the attitude when it comes to the conversation, because I don't know if this has happened anywhere, in
Mm.
organizations where they actually. So this is about employee well-being, right? And the reason I ask this is
Ah,
because it's not just about having like a healthy sex life, but also how do we approach the conversations with people? As I said, we want to be inclusive, right? There are people that are
yes, yes.
single. There are
Right, of
people that
course.
are single because they are not coupled up with anyone, or single because they are single parents. There are people that are
Yes.
in relationship, like, and all that sorts of
Yeah.
things in life. And if you go to an organization, there would be like all of them. You know,
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah,
yeah,
and I was gonna say, I mean, I think there's a reason why most employers, to my knowledge, like don't think about sex in terms of well-being. And I wouldn't I wouldn't advocate
yeah,
that they
yeah,
do, because I feel like,
yeah,
sexual harassment, like all of that would be rampant. But it is interesting to think about how, having sex could actually be something that is benefiting businesses. Their
yeah,
employees are having more fulfilling sex lives, but how could they promote it in a way that's inclusive? I think it can get really
yeah,
tough, right? And realizing that
yeah.
for many people, sex is associated with trauma. And for other people, they might be asexual and have, not want sex, or people experiencing,
Mm,
some sexual distress if they have, say, like erectile dysfunction or low sexual interest. So, yeah, I think it would be kind of a can of worms for organizations, but I think it's,
yeah.
interesting to think about because I would
Yeah.
argue sex is a key factor in well-being, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't have the answer, and I just had that random thought in my mind because like
Yeah. Yeah, it's
it's
interesting.
interesting. It's interesting how closely related these two topics
Oh,
are.
yeah.
Yet, like when it comes to an organization, especially the corporate environment, it's just like you go and you talk about work,
Yes.
you talk about
Yes.
numbers, and you don't talk about well-being.
No.
And sex is part of well-being, as we know. So
It's
and it's I
true.
know it's very hard to talk about these things because as you said, harassment can be a real thing.
Yes.
If you don't choose the right wording, it can come out really wrong. And I actually heard
Yeah.
from one of my friends the other day, and she was kind of saying like, and it's actually quite horrendous to hear, but she was kind of saying like one of her colleagues was just like he kept talking about sex, and I was kind of like,
Oh.
right, so then that is not really
No, exactly. It would
that's
make
not
you
really
uncomfortable. Yeah.
yeah. So obviously,
That's
it's a very hard space to navigate. But you know what? In the context of this show, we hope that there will be employees that listen to this, employers that listen to this, to kind of like understand perspective at least. Right? It doesn't. You don't
yes.
have to talk
Yeah.
about it if it's a hard topic to navigate. And then perhaps I think it will take us as a society so many more years to actually think about like how we're going to approach such topic, especially in the
Hmm.
professional
Hmm.
context. But yeah, like I think it's so important to know because it's kind of like if you
Yeah.
don't think about it, it's kind of like you don't think of others as humans. Your colleagues, we're all humans. Something
Yeah.
could be
Everybody.
happening to them. Yeah,
It's true. And I like to say too, it's like everyone is here as a result of sex, right? I think it's so
yeah,
funny because sexuality,
absolutely.
science, and the topic of sex doesn't always get much. Like, I feel like sometimes people look down on us a little bit or don't take us seriously. And I'm like, listen, this sex is probably more relatable to most people. And it's the reason we're here and the reason the human race is here, like, and propagate.
Yeah,
So, like, it is important to think about. And yeah,
yeah.
this link to well being, I think, is super interesting to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier in the conversation, and I want to go back to that because now we're going to go into the sexual empowerment side of things when it comes to
Of course.
empowerment. You mentioned something about myths, debunking myths,
Right.
myths and things like that. And I believe that there
Yes.
would also be, like different kinds of attitudes and beliefs about it as well, right? Because we just touched on that earlier. There'll be like, there'll be people that just avoid talking about it altogether. There'll be people that think that it's
Hmm.
taboo. But I'm pretty sure there would be a lot of different kinds of attitudes and beliefs when it comes to sexuality or sex in general
Oh, for
that
sure.
would
Yeah.
that would just make things worse. And
Oh, yes.
like single people have a certain way of looking at it, couples have a different way of looking at it, and
Yeah.
people who are like in different kinds of sexuality, like especially for example asexual people, they have a different way of looking at it. So what are some of the biggest
Ooh,
harmful
yes.
myths and beliefs that we should
Mm.
look out for?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. There are so many, and like you said, I think I love that you said that kind of everyone has like there's so many different types of attitudes and beliefs, and that's true, right? And even in terms of research, like you can look at the idea of sexual attitudes so many different ways. Like, are you sort of afraid of sex, or are we talking about your beliefs about how you could tackle sexual dysfunction? Like, there's so many different things that we
Yep.
could cover here, but I'll try to stay kind of centered on myths. So one of the reason I'm passionate about myths kind of comes from two different things that I've done research on. So the first thing that I was just interested in is just I think we have this myth, and I've seen it in the media, and that was what originally got me excited about it. Is just this idea that like we think that sex should be sort of spontaneous and easy and fun. It often, especially if we're talking about TV shows, they often, will portray like two characters who just like are so attracted to each other and they take their clothes off and they have amazing sex.
Yep.
And I just kind of was struck by how that's so far from the reality of long term relationships. So I ended up kind of making a scale to look at one type of sexual beliefs, which was the idea like, do you think you're sort of destined to have a good sex life if you find your sexual soulmate? Or do you have a more practical view and think that you really have to put effort and work into your sex life? Because my theory is that I think we as a society are really good at knowing like, oh, we have to put work into our relationship or, we have to go to the gym to get a fit body. But I think we don't think about that in terms of our sex life. We're like, oh, no, 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 no. It should just be like, right. If it's with the right person, there should be chemistry. It should be almost this like primal urge and like not this like saying like you might have to schedule sex or you might have to put an effort and try. So
Yeah.
that was kind of one of my sort of like my pet myth, if you will, that I've tried to debunk with my own research. And the other one that I don't know if I wouldn't say I've fully debunked it, but I just found it interesting to think about was the idea that like makeup sex should be super hot and passionate. So again, I think this is something I saw in the media a lot, this idea that like, if you like fight in makeup, you're gonna have like amazing sex and you're super fiery and passionate. But at least in my own research, I didn't find that was the case. And I found that like if you fought and then had sex, the sex was just not as good.
Mm.
So those are just two examples in my own research where I've tried to be like, okay, we seem to believe this, but like no one's really looked at it empirically. So what's the deal with that? Um, and the reason I kind of like to talk about beliefs about sex and the idea that maybe realizing that sex takes work can be important it's because it is related to more broad sort of attitudes and beliefs about the role of sex in relationships. So I think that's where I get the most excited, kind of thinking about how do people view like where sex is placed in your relationship. Do you think it's the most important part of your relationship? And this makes me think of a bunch of other research about some types of people who feel insecure in their relationships and are worried that their partner might leave them. They end up using sex as the barometer for their relationship quality. So they very closely tie how things are going in the bedroom with how they think the relationship is going overall. So that's kind of what I get excited about, if that makes sense in terms of beliefs, is like what role do you think sex plays in a relationship? And how do you think you can make your sex life better?
Yeah, very interesting. What about some of the beliefs and attitudes when it comes to single people or people that
Oh
are,
man, yes.
with sexuality that just, like asexual people, no sex?
Yes.
Yeah. What are
Yes.
some of those?
Yeah, so I feel like there's a lot of beliefs and about single people, misbeliefs, like, and it's even been called singleism, right? Like prejudice against single people. And part of that belief is the idea that single people are really lonely and they're miserable and they're like weird, or you know what I mean, like undesirable, and that can't think of a better word tonight.
Sure.
But that couldn't be further
Exhibit
from the
A.
truth. Yeah, no, no, no. Oh my gosh, yeah. I hope they don't edit this to make me
I
sound
was
like I
trying to
said
be
that you're
funny.
weird.
I'm good. I know
um,
I'm good.
but I think that kind of overlooks this idea that single people often are having sex, whether that's solo sex, using sex toys, or having partners, whether that's casual partners or more kind of frequent partners. And so I think it's harmful to kind of forget about single people when we're thinking about sex, right? I think oftentimes people are thinking sex in like very long-term monogamous committed
Yeah.
relationships. So that's a whole other thing too, our myth that like sex should always be monogamous, or sex should just be between two people. Like that's something that isn't always true. And so I think as a society we do have very limited views of like what sex is. And I think not only does that exclude single people often, it excludes people of different sexual orientations. It excludes people who are asexual and don't want to have sex. It excludes people in consensual non-monogamous relationships. It often excludes people with certain kinks or fetishes. And at least to me, I think we all like my sense is when you say the word sex, like if we polled your listeners, right, I think most people are going to say like have this image of penile vaginal intercourse, right? Just sort of like straight people, like missionary, and that can be harmful because it's like a very limited scope, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think those are already like quite a few, like
Oh, for
harmful
sure.
beliefs and
Oh yeah. Oh, and I could go
misconceptions.
on and on. Like we could,
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
we could. There's so many
Yeah.
harmful beliefs about sex. Yeah.
Yeah, so many harmful beliefs, and I feel like the attitudes that we have would be again shaped up by a lot of different factors. Again, how we were brought up, how our educational system worked, our
Exactly.
influences, and I think it's really hard to bring this up, but I have to because like as I mentioned, right, I was reading, I've been reading a lot of poetry by Rupi Kaur, and one of the things about her and that people know is sexual harassment and trauma that she went
Mm,
through,
mm,
and that is also hard. And I also
yeah.
think, to me, like I have quite a few friends that have similar experiences, and they've come out stronger, and some of them are still working through their trauma, but it's not
Yeah.
easy.
No.
And I think that is where the work really needs to be done, right? Because you not only
Yeah.
understand the different beliefs and attitude, but you also need to understand how to combat them,
Yeah.
coupled with, how we can advocate for sexual empowerment, because people are so different. And, in an hour, we're probably not going to be able to cover all
No.
people, all different
No.
perspectives.
No,
So we can
exactly.
only cover, the baby steps that we can take, right? So what are some of the baby steps we can take to empower sexual,
Ooh.
to advocate for sexual empowerment and to combat all of these beliefs and myths that we were just talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could tackle that question so many different ways, right? So, when I hear that question, the first thing I think of, right, is like, we need comprehensive sex ed because, like, I guess you can think of it. I think of like what we can do as a society. We'll get down to what the individual can do, but I think that's the main thing,
Yeah.
right? Because, and research
Yeah.
supports that, right? It's like if you get good, proper sexual education that's talks about pleasure, talks about everything, very inclusive. That's You're gonna have better sex life. You're not gonna feel shame, all of that. And I think that's important. And I think that that's kind of then going to trickle down to people feeling more comfortable talking with their friends, right? Because I think one of the issues now is like people don't always, you know, they don't know a lot that we would probably come out if people felt more comfortable sharing about their sex life. So I'll give two quick examples. One thing that comes to mind is I think people overestimate how much sex everybody else is having in committed relationships. So there's some research done that shows on average couples have sex in long-term relationships 1 to 2 times a week. And for most people, that's kind of a sweet spot in terms of maximizing their well-being. And some people are like, what? Oh my gosh. Like I thought you had to have sex like 4 times a week, or things like that. So I think that's just like an example of like if we were more open talking about it, people would probably realize that like no one's well, not no one, of course, and we're being inclusive here, but like it's not the norm to have sex like every
Okay.
day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's
Yes,
one
absolutely.
example. The other thing is
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of this, but I love it's a couple years old now, but the website OMG Yes, it was like a website that's meant to it teaches women about their bodies, it teaches them sexual pleasure and like literally like kind of like how to videos and things like that. And I think that's a great example because that's the type of thing that's like missing, right? Because people aren't getting it from sex ed. Most times people aren't talking about this with their girlfriends, depending on, or not girlfriends, sorry, but like people in their friend group. And so I think it's like those are the types of things I think we need to feel empowered. And I think when we talk about education, that also includes just being aware of how, like, there still is a sexual double standard. So I think we, again, often think we've come further than we have. Like, so realizing that women are still being punished more for their sexuality than men, and still in most couples, like the men's pleasure is getting a privilege if we're talking about straight couples. And so I think being mindful of that is really important to realize like, oh, I feel like I'm not articulating the best, but what I'm trying to get at here too is like learning that the orgasm gap between men and women, where men often usually orgasm in sexual encounters, whereas a lot of women don't, being aware of that is an important first step. But what I like to teach my students is stuff about how same sex attracted women can actually orgasm pretty frequently. So it's not actually that women can't orgasm or that it's hard to make women orgasm or things like that. It's often only women partnered with men that are having trouble orgasming. So it's more to do with sexual scripts and the acts that people are doing and not anything about women's bodies. So I know that's like a long way, sort of, I've gone on a tangent a little bit, but like to me, that's an example of how we can become more sexually empowered to think like, oh, it's not that as a woman, it's just impossible for me to ever orgasm. It's like, okay, well, hey, maybe it's that your partner's not stimulating parts of your body that would make you orgasm, or maybe it's that you're feeling insecure about your body and that's why,
Mm.
and so I think there's
Yeah.
it's kind
Yeah.
of like education is
Yeah.
empowerment in my mind.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you know what? That is really interesting to me. And I know we have an agenda and all, but I kind of want to go off script a little bit here because I think this is getting interesting. Because you mentioned earlier, right? One of the key things would be when you're sexually empowered, you're able to communicate your needs.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, now I know for a fact after talking to friends that this is not easy at all.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah.
And I know for myself, not easy at all. because it's such a weird conversation to have. It's such a, like, it's a sensitive topic, and it's kind of like, how do you approach it? How do you even talk about it with your partner, no matter how close you are? Because like sexual
Hmm.
intimacy, it's a whole different thing, and it's another topic to touch on. But I think in the context of sexual empowerment, how do you think we
Hmm.
can approach that? How can people? What are some of the tools and tips then for people to communicate better when it comes to their sexual needs or what works for them?
Yeah, it's something a lot of people struggle with. So yeah, 100%. One of my favorite things that again, another like stat I tell people is that if you ask couples, are you comfortable talking about sex? Almost all of them are like, oh yeah, I can talk to my partner about sex. And then you say, okay, well, how many of you have actually had a conversation with your partner about sex in the last year? And it's like, like I think like 20%. You know what I mean? So everyone's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I can talk to my partner, but no one's really doing it because it's so vulnerable and it's so there's so much meaning and beauty in it. So some strategies. One thing is that some other research shows that communicating non-verbally during sex can be really effective. So if we're talking kind of specifically about sexual empowerment in terms of getting more of what you want, just being, vocalizations, just making sure your partner knows what they're doing is actually pleasing you. I think that's one key thing. So I mentioned that because it's like I know a lot of people don't want to have like a formal sit down conversation and talk about what they do and don't like. So if you're not comfortable doing that, like remember that nonverbals can be really, really important, and most partners can pick up on that. Um, I think flexing your general communication muscle is important. So just like practice, like you and your partner need to be good communicators outside the bedroom to be good communicators inside the bedroom, right? So it's if you can't talk to your partner about how you don't like how they're cooking your steak, how are you going to talk to them about, you know, what their sexual routine. So I think really honing your communication skills and your relationship more broadly can really benefit you in the bedroom. And then one of the things I like to tell people is if it's more like about not feeling comfortable sharing certain sexual desires you might have, there are like some fun websites you can go on where you can like answer a survey separately from your partner where you kind of rate a bunch of different sexual acts and then it'll give you a list later of like things you both said you might be interested to try. So I feel like now we live in a day and age where we're lucky that there's websites like that, there's apps that can like maybe help you do some of the awkward communication, but I think that will only go so far, right? So you really do have to be at a certain point willing to be honest to your partner. And here I feel like I should make sure I say, do not fake orgasm. Like, please do not, right? Because um, that can dig you. Maybe that's not the best euphemism, but like, then you can dig yourself a hole that you can't get out of, right? If you've been with the same partner for a long time and you're always faking orgasm, like, and they've been doing the same thing, they're not going to really understand that they're not pleasing you. And even if you try to backtrack later and be like, oh, I'm not like, this isn't working for me, they're going to feel really hurt and betrayed because you haven't let them know that early on. So being open and honest is really important. But I think kind of when it comes to sexual communication, it's just like any other area of your relationship. Like just be sensitive to your partner, kind of know it's an area that is so makes everyone feel vulnerable. So just being, and people naturally do this. There's evidence to support this that people are better, like when we're having a kind of a disagreement about sex versus a normal conflict with our partner. We know it's more sensitive, so we tend to be a little bit nicer and kind of softer. And so just be mindful of that. And I think it's like you just have to think of the long-term gains, right? It's like I would
Yeah.
rather have a 2-minute uncomfortable conversation now and have, greater better sexual relationships, better, that should spill over to have a better romantic relationship, better, well-being, all of the things. So
Yeah.
sometimes better to just sort of bite the bullet.
Yeah. And it sounds to me like a lot of the things that you're talking about would go back to just how we communicate in general.
Exactly.
Not even about, sex only, but you said
No.
it's gotta come from outside the bedroom and then we go into the bedroom. I think that's so true because I think a lot of people just kind of like skip straight to that part where it's kind of like, okay, let's do it. And never actually talk about what is wrong outside of the bedroom. And then it kind of like, over time, and this is what I just know from my friends and, like watching movies and things like that, which is over time, it's just kind of like you get into the habit. It's like being
Yeah.
in this relationship is a habit rather than
Yes.
actually being in it. And so I think it's also important. Another thing that I noticed and realized is it's important to know ourselves.
Oh,
If
of
you don't,
course.
if I don't know myself, then I won't be able to communicate that to my partner.
No, no, exactly. And if you don't know your own, if you haven't reflected on your boundaries, if you haven't reflected
Yeah.
on, you know, how you view consent, if you haven't reflected on your sexual preferences, like, yeah, it's going to be hard to communicate those things. Right. And that's why I think sometimes, especially for women, I think sometimes having solo sex, like exploring, using sex toys, things like that can be really
Yeah.
helpful in terms of knowing
Yeah.
yourself. If we're talking about like sort of like sexually knowing yourself, but I think it's also important to just more generally know your comfort level, and things like that to feel more confident, right? Because I think sexual empowerment is a lot about feeling confident in yourself and,
Mm.
and feeling able to communicate what you want.
So I mentioned this in the previous episode that had a similar topic, and I want to talk about it again because I think it's so cool. I don't know, but I was in a self-development phase a couple of years ago. I just went like on a tangent and just binge all of these self-development videos. And one of the things that popped up, I think on one of the channels like Jubilee or something, was that this lady, she was talking about her own sexual empowerment, and she was saying, "I barely orgasmed when I was in a relationship." But then one
Oh.
day, it's something along the line of one day, I decided that I would explore my own sexuality and like what I
Mm-hmm.
prefer in terms of sex. And she was like, like I just made a date night out of it. Lit some candle,
I
prepared a
love it.
towel, explored myself, and had the best orgasm. And then she's like such an empowered woman, like empowered and
Yes.
empowering woman in that. And I was like, that is so interesting. Why don't we talk about that more? Because a lot of the
Yes.
time it's just kind of like when it comes to sex, it's automatically, just like you said, it's like P and V. It's like automatically
Mm-hmm.
like two people right there.
Mm-hmm.
But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be like that, right?
No, exactly. And especially for single people. And even if you're in a relationship, like a lot of people most of their pleasure, they get a lot of pleasure from solo sex, and a lot of some of the purported benefits of sex would be there for it, right? It's like you're having
Yeah.
that release. And I think it's so important to explore yourself. And it's very common for women to experience orgasm, in solo sex and not always in relationships, right? So I think it is
Yeah.
like, people talk about it in terms of self-care, and it's like, yeah, why
Yeah.
not? Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's been great advances in terms of sex toys. I think slightly less stigma against sex toys than there used to be. So, I think we're getting there in terms of that being more normative. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's kind of a common story in a way, right? It's cool. But not always, that not always something we talk about, but something that is bearing out in the data in terms of that being a very common experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just gonna keep going with the flow and off script right here.
Of
But I
course.
really love that you emphasize the power of education. But
Yes.
we know we did not get the kind of education that we should
No,
have got.
exactly.
Most of us, at least, I have not met anyone who's like, oh yeah, like I'm very well educated in sexual education. No, not really. I've never met anyone like that. It's most of the time their own exploration.
Yes,
And we
yes.
we all have different ways of exploring, but I wonder what would be some of the best ways that we can educate
Mm,
ourselves.
yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I would always just say, like, look for resources that are by either sex therapists or clinical psychologists or couples and family therapists. I mean, there's so much out there that's just by, random influencers, YouTubers. I love that you said you were into personal development because there's so many like gurus who give advice. Always look at the credentials. One that I personally like that I assigned to my class is, there's a podcast by Justin Lane Miller. He also has a website called The Psychology of Sexuality. Double check the name, but it is one of my favorites. And it's like legit, right? Because he's like the same credentials as me. Like he's a sex researcher, but has a psychology background. And it's a good way of kind of communicating science to the public. So that's one of the things I think. I
Yeah.
would When it comes to porn, that's another place that realistically a lot of people turn to for education. And of course, the thing that I would just caution there is I know everyone knows it's not real, but you kind of forget that oftentimes, right? So people think certain things they see in porn or in the media, is normative, and it really isn't. So I would just make sure that, at least be porn literate or get up on your porn literacy, and not just trust everything that you see in porn.
Yeah. I love that you emphasize the credentials part because that's really important. I think
Yes.
that's at least what I've learned through doing this podcast and being on this show, like having the science behind things would be super critical because sometimes we can just say anything, but if science
Oh, for
doesn't back it,
sure.
then it doesn't mean anything.
And I find it so fascinating because I feel like, and I mean, I get it because it's so relatable, but I think because people have experience with both, most people often have experience with sex and relationships, they think it's an area that they are the experts in. And of course, you're experts in your own lived experience, and I'm not like discounting that at all. But I think it's like you also should recognize that some people have spent years and years like doing empirical studies on this, randomized experiments, like all of the things to try to learn some of the patterns more broadly. So yeah, I'm like always like check out the credentials. I do also like Esther Perel personally, like in terms of just sort of more general couples relationship stuff. And OMG Yes that I mentioned, that's a good one in terms of sort of like sex skills. There's also a cool app called Get Coral that some sex researchers are part of. That's interesting as well. So I feel like what's exciting me is that I think we're starting to recognize that everyone got crap sex ed. And so there are great sort of blogs and podcasts and the apps that I've sort of been mentioning that can do, go a long way in helping to fill that gap. But I think it is
Yeah.
kind of at the end of the day, it's sort of, it needs to be something that you yourself want to prioritize and learn about and start to learn, know yourself, right? Because it's like those aren't just going to fall in your lap. You have to seek them out. And so I really encourage people to do that if they're trying to work on their sex life, like don't listen to the random mommy blogger on Instagram or I mean,
Yeah.
do, but also please listen to some sources. And there's lots of great books too, right? Again, by some of these people. People really like Sex at Dawn. There's a bunch of other ones that are popular, but I think we're lucky that as it gets more comfortable talking about, there are more sources. Oh, the last book I'll mention that I do like, that I have read, because I like to only do ones that I read, is a book called Sexual Mindfulness by Lori Brotto. So she is a clinical psychologist who's done a lot of work on the idea of sexual mindfulness, like applying mindfulness to the sexual space and how that can help people, can help everyone, but especially people experiencing distress in the bedroom.
Wow, so many great recommendations. Thank you. I think that's the perfect way to round out, what we just discussed because, it's as much as we talk about the theory behind it, it's time to get practical and really do some research
Okay,
because I
yes.
think it's not like you sit back and you listen to a podcast and all your problems will be solved. I think it's a constant
No, exactly.
like figuring out process. And if you know any sources, you got to look into that. And
Yes.
we've got great recommendations from you already. I'm sure our audience would probably know other places to look as well. But I think it
Exactly.
starts with us, right? It doesn't start outside, it doesn't start elsewhere. And I think it's so important to know about all this stuff, especially if you're single.
Yes. Oh, of
When
course,
you're
because
single,
that's
it's
the
like the
thing.
perfect time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And explore yourself, all of the things. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we move on to something more practical, do you have anything else you would like to add in this area? Because, I know that in some of the questions we did mention, like the outcomes of being sexually empowered, but we already touched on the
Right.
benefits of that when it comes to well-being. So I think that's pretty much covered. We did
Yeah.
mention a little bit about, yeah, the different backgrounds that people have, but we didn't get to
Hmm,
cover
hmm.
societal pressure. I'm not sure if you wanted to give any
Oh,
thoughts on that
yeah.
at all.
Yeah. So, there's kind of a couple things that I want to add sort of before we get more practical. But when thinking about beliefs related to sexual empowerment, I was just part of some research that's come out. We did it in New Zealand, but it was an online study about how your beliefs about gender roles might affect your sexual empowerment. So a lot of research has focused on how, like, if you believe that women should be traditional, that's not going to be good for women's sex lives. But what we were looking at is how we think it's important to really, if we're talking about mixed sex relationships, like man woman relationships, we need to also consider how we view the other gender roles. So, if I like to be truly sexually empowered, for me to feel comfortable initiating and refusing sex in a relationship, I not only need to think about, women being able to be, less traditional and more liberated, but I also need to make sure I have more modern views of men as well. Because I feel like what ends up happening, I don't have data on this, but just anecdotally, is I think a lot of women who are, not having traditional beliefs about women, like they don't think that women should be stay at home moms, or they don't think women can't swear or can't earn more money than their husband. Like we're getting better about that, of women being like, no, I don't need to be traditional. But we still hold a lot of maybe harmful ideas of what men need to act like, right? So like men should always be ready for sex, or, men should be really tough, and all of that. And so what we were just looking at is how we need to think about when we're talking about couples, their views about both men and women in order for us to understand their comfort in the bedroom. Because I can feel sexual empowered myself all I want, but if I think it's my partner's job to initiate sex, or that he needs to be a macho man, like that's not going to actually lead to good things in the bedroom. And I think I forgot to say one of the most important parts, which is that couples where people feel more sexually assertive or sexually empowered, or however we want to call it, they end up being more satisfied with their relationship. So sexual empowerment is really important to think about.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's a great message to close with. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for
no
sharing
problem.
that. And now let's get more practical. Yes, it's the last part of the show where we talk about a practice, and we like to ask our experts what they do for themselves, because
Mm.
this will get really good and it'll get really sort of like relatable, I would say. Of course, people might or might not relate to it, but we always ask, what is a practice that you use personally to actually enhance the role of sexual empowerment in your life and to promote your health and well-being in all aspects?
Right. Okay. So I hope this isn't like a cop out answer, because I think my answer is actually much less about what I do in the bedroom. I'm sure that would be juicy and fun for people to learn about. But it actually, to me, the first step in having sex and sexual empowerment enhance well being is to have a solid relationship, and to you know, get my partner and I in the mood for sex. That was like, I should have recommended that podcast and book. uh, Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, and her podcast and book are like huge fans of that.
Okay.
And what she talks about, where I'm going with this, is she talks about the idea of that, like, especially in a longer term relationship, it's not about like your partner is just not going to be like a switch necessarily and always be in the mood for sex, but you need to sort of set up the context for pleasure to be experienced. So, not just thinking, desire doesn't always need to be spontaneous. Sometimes it's what she calls responsive, and other researchers as well, which is like, you can sort of slowly build up the mood to want to engage in sex. So, if my partner draws me a bath and we like have a nice intimate conversation, like those might be things that then set the stage for a better sex life. So the practice that I do, and this might sound cheesy, is just trying to make sure we do regular date nights. Um, Trying to every 2 weeks at least. Why I think that's important is it can help us kind of reaffirm our connection, our intimacy. There's also lots of research that if you go on an exciting date night, exciting is maybe a stretch. It doesn't even have to be exciting. Just doing something new with your partner is so important for your passion and leads to greater sexual desire. So I'm not necessarily talking about like trying a new sex position, just doing something new, like going to a new restaurant, or, taking a cooking class, or, going for a walk on a different part of the town. Anything like that can really help you learn more about your partner and see them in a new light. And then that helps you feel more passion and kind of busts you out of your rut, if you will. It can help like, counteract some of that relationship boredom. And that is what's going to make you feel more passion and kind of feel in the mood for sex in the first place. So date nights, I think, are really key. And then to me, kind of doing that can really just help remind you that your partner is a priority. Because I think, and your listeners will know this, we're all busy. We all have so much. Even if you're single, you're so busy. There's so much going on in your life. And it's like you need to carve out time for what matters. And so spending time in a way is showing that you place value on that thing. And so that's why I think I haven't been the best at it this semester when I got really stressed, but trying to do those regular date nights, I think, is like the first step. Because I know this is kind of maybe repeating myself, but I think what I really want to make sure the listeners hear here is that like your sex life doesn't occur in a vacuum. It
Yeah.
is so related, right, to your relationship functioning, your well-being. We've already talked about that, how like your communication and your relationship matters for your bedroom communication. And likewise, what happens in the bedroom can influence the relationship and the well-being. So it's like, it would make sense then that a solution to help your sex life doesn't always necessarily need to be in the sexual domain in particular. And here I'll plug, if I'm allowed to, there's an amazing app called Coupla that makes it easier for couples to plan date nights. So it like reminds you when you're supposed to do
Oh,
date nights. Yeah, it's really inspiring because I love it because it's really meant to like help you make it easier to maintain your relationship and do date nights. So that's something that I think is a great tool if you're like, oh, like it reminds your partner if it's time for date night or like who's planning it, and it can help you book reservations like right there and give you date night ideas. Um, and yeah, I just think it's important to like, I think the more you kind of spend time with your partner and get out of your rut, that's gonna then enhance your your life in the bedroom for sure.
oh, I love that. It's so sweet. And yeah, I totally agree with you. It's not, yeah, I don't think we meant to ask you about any juicy detail. This is actually quite good and practical because I love that you mentioned earlier, right? And this goes right back to the theory. Like it happens in the relationship first, outside of the
Yeah.
bedroom, before it goes in there. Because if you have the
Yes.
strong
Yes.
foundation and you can communicate well, the rest will just flow. And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
really truly believe in that. And I agree with you. And I love the date night idea. Like when I am in a relationship, I'll pick that up for sure. Thank you
Yes,
so much for
yes.
sharing
Or
that.
you know what? We should make like self date night ideas too, right? It's like you can, explore
Yeah,
yourself or do some self
absolutely.
care, all of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So your practice is yours, but I think what other people can take from that, depending on their relationship status and like sexual
Hmm.
preference, yeah, date night with self is great. I love doing that. I take myself out to
Yes,
movies, dinners, and like
exactly.
yeah, like
Quality
just like
quality time with
quality
yourself.
time. Exactly. I really, really love that.
Actually,
And in
and I
fact,
love
yeah, I'm gonna
do
tell my
that.
friends to do that too. Yeah.
And I love that you mentioned that to remind me to think about the single people, because actually the theory that I was talking about doing new things, making you feel passionate in your relationship, that theory is like a broader theory called self expansion. And I mean, the word self is in it because it is all about yourself, expanding your sense of self. So another way to kind of capitalize on my hack is that even if you're not doing like date nights with a partner, just doing something new and stepping outside your comfort zone can really help you feel fulfilled because you feel like you're growing, right? So maybe you're, using one of those apps to learn a new language, or, cooking a new recipe, or like what have you, running a personal best, like anything that's pushing yourself and your sense of self and growing. Because we just love to grow and as humans, right? And not just be like stuck in the
Yeah.
same old boring rut.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Love that. Well, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of things, and I hope that we've been as inclusive as we can to be able to
Yes.
relate with, yeah, or let our audience relate with what we are talking about so everyone can sort of take away something. And if not, you just share these tips with their friends and family because I think some of the things that you mentioned were super interesting to me. Um, I love that we start with the self. That's always really really
Hmm.
important, and
Hmm.
that it's such a big emphasis, especially when we're talking about well being and like all the different aspects of our well being, right? So
It's so
again,
true.
thank you for that. It's been really great talking about that. But now let's go to open mic. It is your forum,
Oh,
your
okay.
stage. You can talk about anything you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be about the topic, but yeah, the floor is yours, Jen.
Oh,
Take it away.
okay. I feel like it's like so much pressure because I was like, there's so much. I feel like I've said a lot of what I kind of wanted to say, but if I do have the floor, um, I think one of my other, since we've been talking a little bit about singlehood, I think I'll just briefly talk about sort of modern dating and online dating, and also one a body of work that I've helped with that my colleague leads on fear of being single. So I love that you were talking about kind of making sure we try to think about single people in this, because I think there, like I mentioned, there's singleism, prejudice against being single. There's ideas that single people are kind of miserable loners, which isn't true. Single people have really, wide social networks. They can have really, there's a lot of amazing things about being single. But what we've looked at is if you are afraid of being single, that can really backfire in a way. So people who are concerned, even if you're in a relationship right now, you can fear being single and just never want to be in that state. And that can lead people to stay in crappier relationships. Or if you fear being single and you're currently single, if you think like, oh, I'm really worried about not finding a partner, um, my colleague Stephanie Spielman has shown in her research that like you end up kind of saying yes to going on dates with like less desirable people, like people who are kind of more jerkish, like unresponsive, me, kind of like assholes, if I'm allowed to swear, I don't know. So I like to remind people that, because I think it's like, why are you afraid about, if someone's high on that fear, I'm like, well, why are you afraid of being single? Single people can be fulfilled for so many different reasons. And if you're too high on this fear, you're going to actually get into a relationship that you don't even want to be in, really, right? Or like one that's going to make you feel less satisfied down the line, or maybe, a partner who's not going to treat you the best. So I think thinking about ways that people can lower their fears about being single and see it as a more positive state could go a long way to help people feel more fulfilled when they are single, because single people can have great sex lives. They can have great relationships with their siblings, right? Like there's so much, so many possibilities for having a good singlehood experience. And it's like, just don't fear it, because if you fear that singlehood state, you're going to have a crappy time being single, and you're going to like kind of rush into a relationship that you might not be ready for. And I think like online dating apps kind of exacerbate this, right? People kind of feel like they might never find a partner, or that it's like hopeless, and people get really kind of annoyed, like kind of frustrated, I guess, with the dating app experience. So I guess if you're listening to this, I don't have like many practical tips about how to reduce your fear of being single, other than think of all the amazing things about being single, and just kind of be advised that if you're too high on this fear, you might end up, you know, shooting yourself in the foot, if you will, in terms of like getting into a relationship and staying in a relationship that might not be satisfying.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love that so much because as I said, I'm single and I'm loving it. I'm just embracing it.
Yay!
I love that you said the message yourself, because I have a lot of friends who are also kind of like, constantly looking for relationships. And there's really no nice way to say it, but I feel like it's better for them to work on themselves first.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
just
yeah,
like, just like myself, like I realize that there's just so much self-work that needs to be done before getting into anything. And I think that's totally okay. I take
of
my time,
course.
and people take their time, and things will happen naturally. I don't think we need to force that. And I know online dating is a
Exactly.
very big thing nowadays. And
Yes, yes.
my one of my girlfriends just keeps saying like, oh, like just go on Bumble. I'm like, but I don't want to. It's just not
Yeah. Well, then that's
not
the
how I
thing.
roll, and not what I
Yeah.
want to do right now. So I'm okay being just like here, being me.
Yeah, and not feeling that
Yeah.
pressure. And I think that's so good
No.
too, right? Because it's like you should only go on. And I mean, I think you're going to have a better experience on those apps if you're doing it because you want to be on them and not because you feel pressure, right? So
Yeah.
there's research showing that, right? Like if we do things for more approach focused reasons, to try to get, because you want to, not because you're trying to just like avoid being single or avoid your friend getting mad at you, like it's just not going to be a good scene. And I did find my partner on Bumble, so lucky me. But
Aw,
but I think it's like,
congrats.
well, thank you. But I love what you said too, that you need to work on yourself and be in that place. And the other kind of concept that I see linked to these ideas from relationship science that I think is really cool is called commitment readiness. And it's just the idea that like you need to feel ready to be in a committed relationship. And when you do feel ready, then you are more likely to put an effort into dating and have a better relationship. So I often think that too. It's like there's my partner and I wouldn't have met and wouldn't have clicked if we weren't in that space where we were point in our lives where we were both looking for commitment. And it's like it's not like everybody's going to be there right now. So it's like, yeah, don't feel pressure to use the apps.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Such a beautiful message to close with. And
Yeah.
yeah, as I said before, I found the article that you wrote with your colleague a long, long time ago, "Settling for Less Out of Fear of Being Single," and I just love that
Yes.
title. I'm
Oh,
like,
I'm so glad. Yeah,
yeah, I know so many people do that, and we need to talk about that.
they
Please stop doing
do.
that.
Yes, don't settle for less. And it's like
Yeah,
we've shown in other research too, there's no reason these people need to settle for less, right? They're just as
yeah.
attractive, just as desirable, just as amazing. So, like, yeah, get that out of your head.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Jess. It's been
No
a really
problem.
enlightening conversation. I honestly think we can go on all day because, if we keep digging around, there will be
Oh my
areas that we
gosh.
haven't uncovered. But I know it's probably late there and I should
Yes.
really let you go. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully your voice will get better. I cannot believe you held through the whole conversation, even though it's been really hard to talk. So we appreciate your time and energy. And yeah, it's been a really great chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been so great.
You've been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.